Chapter 5, A Game of Wits and Might. The fire in the hearth crackled, sending occasional sparks dancing up toward the chimney. The warm light flickered across the worn wooden beams of the Gilded Acorn, making the shadows in the corners seem alive, but tonight the shadows were mostly content to watch. Thorgar, now settled comfortably into his seat, let out a loud sigh and wiped his hands on his thick leather pants. Well, this is a fine way to start an evening, sitting in a tavern with no challenge to be had. Seems like it's been too long since I've had a good test of strength, or wit, he boomed, slapping his battle hammer against the side of his chair. Roderic raised an eyebrow, glancing over at the dwarf. A test of wit, you say? Well, that's an unusual challenge for someone of your size. He flashed a teasing grin. Size doesn't matter if you've got brains, boy. Thorgar chuckled, giving a loud thud to his chest. But I'll admit, it's a fine combination when you've got both. Shadowleaf, who had been quietly observing the two men, leaned forward with a mischievous glint in her eyes. You two are amusing, she said, her voice smooth and dripping with sarcasm. But I wonder, are you really willing to back up those words? What do you mean by that? Thorgar asked, his brow furrowing slightly, though his grin didn't fade. He was a dwarf. After all, he never shied from a challenge. The thief's lips curled into a smirk. I think the tavern would be a little more entertaining if there were some stakes involved. A game, perhaps? Something with skill, wit, and a little bit of luck. Roderic's eyes gleamed. He was not one to shy away from a challenge either. What do you have in mind? Shadowleaf leaned back, glancing toward the tavern wench who was making her rounds, before lowering her voice just enough for only the three of them to hear. We could play a game of dice, best of 3 rounds. Each round, the loser adds a coin to the pot. But here's the fun part, at the end of each round, the loser must answer a question honestly. Thorgar chuckled heartily, rubbing his hands together. Ah, now this sounds like a game. Dice, coins, and secrets. I like the way this woman thinks. What about you, Roderic? Roderic stroked his chin thoughtfully. A gamble with a twist? I'm intrigued. But let's make it interesting. I suggest we throw in another game, too, a little physical challenge. If I win the dice, we move to arm wrestling. If I lose, then we move to something more cerebral. Shadowleaf raised an eyebrow. A bit confident, are we? Roderic shrugged, his grin widening. I have my reasons. Then let's make it official, Thorgar boomed, reaching for his mug and raising it high. To games, challenges, and the thrill of victory. He took a long swig of his drink. With the challenge accepted, the three of them quickly set up for the dice game. A few patrons in the tavern had caught wind of what was happening and, eager to see some fun, gathered around their table. The tavern wench, noticing the increasing interest, brought over a small leather cup filled with dice and set it down with a grin. Looks like you've got an audience now. Try not to embarrass yourselves, she teased before walking off to serve another table. The 3 players rolled their dice, each one's hand more deliberate than the last. Shadowleaf's nimble fingers flicked the dice like they were an extension of her body, her eyes never leaving the others. Roderic was more methodical, his steady hand letting the dice tumble before setting them down with confidence. Thorgar, on the other hand, seemed to throw his dice with an unrestrained enthusiasm, laughing boisterously as they clattered across the table. The first round was quickly over. Shadowleaf's roll was the highest, with a perfect combination of numbers that left Roderic and Thorgar staring at their results in disappointment. She smirked, her eyes glinting. Looks like I win the first round. Now, the question is, Roderic, tell us, what's your greatest fear? Roderic leaned back, clearly unfazed by the question. My greatest fear, he asked, his tone casual. Simple. Losing control. Whether it's in a fight or in my own life. I've seen enough people fall to know what happens when that control slips away. The group nodded in understanding, and the second round began. This time, it was Roderic who won, leaving Thorgar to answer the next question. The dwarf, never one to shy away from speaking his mind, didn't hesitate. I fear one thing, and one thing only, the thought that my people might forget what it means to be a dwarf. That we might forget the old ways, the craft, the strength. I fear that we might lose ourselves. The group was silent for a moment, each reflecting on the weight of his words. But the third and final round loomed, and with it came the stakes of the final game. The dice were rolled again, and this time, the tension was palpable. Thorgar won, his hearty laugh booming in the air as he threw his dice across the table. Ah! Victory at last, he cried, slamming his fist on the table in triumph. Shadowleaf smirked but quickly regained her composure. Well played, dwarf. But a challenge is a challenge. Now, it's time to arm wrestle. The group laughed, and the onlookers began to cheer, a few patrons joining in with their own bets and boasting. One particularly burly man stood up, looking over at the trio. With a wink. I'll bet a few coins I can take on one of YA. Shadowleaf smiled slyly, casting a glance at Roderic and Thorgar. What do you say? A little more fun? Roderic grinned. Why not? It seems like everyone's eager to join in. And so, the contest began. What started as a friendly game of dice soon turned into a full-fledged series of challenges, with strength, wits, and luck all tested to their limits. Each round was met with cheers, groans, and wagers placed by the tavern-goers. Even Elda Fenroot, still seated in her corner, observed the growing chaos with quiet curiosity. Her eyes moved between the group of three, now deep in the heat of the contest, and the others who had joined in, eager for a chance to show their own skills. As the night wore on, the tavern's lively atmosphere grew even more boisterous. Elda continued to watch, a knowing look in her eyes. There was something about these three, something in the way they carried themselves and interacted. Perhaps, just perhaps, they were the ones who could face the challenge she had been waiting for. And, for the first time in a long while, a small glimmer of hope sparked in her chest. Could they be the ones, she whispered to herself, watching as the games continued, the flicker of a new possibility stirring in the air.